It's strange how a life can end without dying. That night, the rain didn't just fall, it accused. Every drop against the glass sounded like a verdict I already knew was coming. Thomas's voice echoed through the hallway, cold and certain. You don't belong in this house anymore. I stood there, holding nothing but an old suitcase and a trembling dog who once slept beside my husband's armchair. Max pressed against my leg, whimpering, as if even he couldn't understand how love could turn into exile so easily. The chandelier above us flickered. The marble floor, once polished by laughter, now looked like ice. He tossed a rusty key toward me. It landed at my feet with a hollow sound. The warehouse by the lake. Stay there. You like old things anyway. His smirk cut deeper than the rain outside. I didn't argue. There was no use arguing with someone who had already replaced grief with greed. I turned, one last time toward the portrait of Richard, my late husband. His eyes seemed to follow me, calm but sorrowful, like he knew this moment would come. The door slammed behind me. Max barked once, a sharp sound that vanished into the thunder. The mansion stood tall and heartless in the storm, while I, the woman who had once called it home, stepped into the night. As the rain soaked through my coat, I told myself it was only water, but deep down, I knew better. This isn't the end, I whispered. It's the beginning of what he left behind. I didn't yet know about the warehouse, or the box waiting there in the dark, or the secret my husband had buried, not in the ground, but in code. That night, all I had was a key, a dog, and the faint echo of Richard's last promise. If they ever forget what love built, Ellie, the house will remember. I didn't understand it then, but soon I would.
I remember the smell of lemon polish in Richard's study the day we signed our wills. The sun poured through the tall windows, hitting the mahogany desk where two pens waited, one for him, one for me. He had that same calm smile he always wore when he wanted me to stop worrying. If anyone ever tries to break this house apart, Ellie, he said, justice will side with love. I didn't understand the weight of that sentence then. Back then, love was still the law here. We signed the papers side by side, his hand steady, mine trembling. The ink bled slightly into the parchment, like it wanted to stay forever. Our lawyer sealed it, and Richard placed his hand on mine. It's for protection, he said. Not from strangers, but from people who might forget where they came from. He meant Thomas. Thomas was his son from a marriage before me. Polite on the surface, distant underneath. When Richard was alive, they argued about everything from investments to values. Thomas wanted risk. Richard believed in legacy. After Richard passed, I thought grief would bring Thomas closer. But even at the funeral, he spoke of assets, shares, percentages, as if his father's memory was a spreadsheet to be divided. I still remember Max lying at the foot of the casket, refusing to eat. He whimpered quietly every night after that. Thomas didn't cry once. When people left after the service, he came up to me, voice smooth like silk hiding a knife. You won't have to worry about anything, Ellie. I'll take care of the estate. I smiled faintly then, because I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe family still meant something. For a while, things seemed fine. The bills were paid, the lawn trimmed, the gates maintained. But every detail of the house began to change. Richard's photo from the hallway, gone. The old armchair he used to read in, replaced. Even the garden roses were cut down because they were too messy. That's when I started to realize love doesn't disappear all at once. It fades in silence, replaced by efficiency. One evening, as the sun set over the lake, I stood by the window and whispered to Richard's empty chair, "You said justice would side with love. I hope you were right." At the time, I didn't know what those words would mean. I didn't know that someday I'd be holding that promise like a weapon. I didn't know the will we signed together would become the only thing standing between me and ruin. But I know now. And sometimes I think Richard did too. When Thomas moved in, the house grew colder. Not in temperature, in spirit. He arrived with briefcases, contracts, and that new tone in his voice, the kind that sounded like leadership but smelled like control. "This place needs structure, Mom," he said, straightening his tie. "Dad would have wanted someone who knows how to manage." I didn't argue. I learned long ago that silence was stronger than confrontation. It left men like him uneasy. But as the days passed, his definition of management became clearer. First went Richard's antique paintings, then the old grand piano, the one we used to sing beside after dinner. When I asked where it had gone, Thomas simply replied, "It was taking up space. Someone else can appreciate it now." He called it decluttering. I called it erasing. Soon the study smelled of new varnish instead of memory. The mahogany shelves were replaced with glass, cold, fingerprinted, soulless. He started wearing cufflinks that shimmered under the dining light, like he wanted to blind me with proof of his success. He'd invite brokers to the house, men who spoke too loudly and laughed too easily. They'd tap their pens, talk in numbers, sip whiskey in Richard's old armchairs. This estate could triple in value with the right investment, they'd say. And Thomas nodded like a priest hearing gospel. I watched, silent from the doorway. It wasn't my house anymore. Not really. Even Max noticed. He'd bark when Thomas walked in, not out of anger, but confusion, like he didn't recognize him. One afternoon, I heard Max yelp, a sharp, desperate sound that froze my blood. When I rushed downstairs, I saw him limping, his paw bleeding faintly onto the marble. Thomas stood over him, face blank. "He got in my way. Dogs shouldn't wander in the house." Later, Clara, the maid who'd worked here for 20 years, whispered as she cleaned the tiles. "He said it was an accident, ma'am, but the way he looked at Max..." She didn't finish. She didn't have to. That night, I sat beside Max on the kitchen floor. I stroked his fur until his trembling stopped. Rain tapped on the windows, steady and soft, like Richard's heartbeat used to be. I wanted to cry, but no tears came. Only a strange stillness, a realization. Love doesn't die when someone leaves you. It dies when someone stays and forgets what it means to care. I started writing again, in the same old leather notebook Richard once gave me. Not to accuse, not to fight, just to remember. Each night, I'd jot down what Thomas sold, what he said, what he broke. I called it my record of forgetting. Because sometimes when a house stops remembering love, someone has to.
The warehouse smells of rust and rain, the kind of smell that clings to your clothes and your bones. Richard used to call this place his thinking shed. Now, it's my home. The roof leaks where the metal's gone soft. The walls are cracked like old hands, and the light only sneaks in through a thin slit beneath the door. I've placed a tin bowl there to catch the dripping water. Its sound has become my nightly clock. Drip, drip, drip. Each drop feels like another second of a life I didn't choose. I wash my clothes in a plastic basin and heat tea over a small camping stove. It's ridiculous. Elegant tea leaves and a chipped tin mug, but it makes me feel civilized, as if I'm still myself. Max sleeps by the door. He's slower now, older, and just as loyal. I talk to him like I used to talk to Richard. Sometimes I imagine he understands. When I say, "Do you miss him too?" he lifts his head and sighs. That's enough of an answer. Days blend together here. Dust gathers on everything, boxes, frames, old tools. At night, mice scurry behind the shelves, their tiny feet scratching against the wood. I don't chase them away. They remind me that something else still lives here besides me. Yesterday, while cleaning, I stumbled upon an old oak box tucked beneath a pile of blankets. The lid was carved, faint but clear. For Ellie, when the house forgets love. I froze. Richard's handwriting curved, deliberate, unmistakable. My hand shook as I lifted it onto the table. The hinges creaked softly, like a whisper from another time. Inside was a small USB drive wrapped in cloth and a folded letter. The paper smelled faintly of cedar and ink. His scent. Ellie, the letter read, "If you're reading this, it means the house no longer remembers what love built it from. Inside this USB is the future, not of money, but of trust. It belongs to the one who still carries the heart of this family. Use it when you must, and know that I never stopped believing in you." I stared at the words until they blurred through my tears. My heart pounded as I reached for my old laptop, the one Richard used to fix whenever it overheated. It whirred, coughed, flickered. The screen came to life, lines of static rolling like ghosts across the glass. Then a face. His face. Richard looked straight at me through the years, his eyes steady, kind, as if he'd known exactly where I'd be sitting. "Ellie," he said softly, "if you found this, it means things have gone as I feared. Don't be afraid. You were always stronger than you thought. And remember, love was never about what we kept, but what we gave." The video ended. I sat there frozen, with my tea gone cold and my breath trembling. Max rested his head on my knee, and I finally broke. I cried. Not the kind of crying that comes when hope sneaks back in after you thought it was gone forever. When I opened the USB folder, I didn't know what I'd find, but part of me already knew. This was more than just a message. It was a key, and whatever it unlocked was waiting for me to be brave enough to turn it.
When the folder finally opened, I didn't expect much. Maybe a few family photos, some letters, an old spreadsheet. Richard loved spreadsheets. But there it was, a single file named wallet.txt. I clicked it. Lines of text filled the screen, long, confusing, full of numbers and strange characters. And then one line stopped me cold. Wallet balance, 1 million BTC. For a moment, I thought it was a typo. Maybe he'd added too many zeros. I laughed, a small, nervous laugh that didn't quite sound like mine. Then curiosity got the better of me. I opened the browser on that sluggish laptop and typed 1 million Bitcoin in USD. The search results blinked on the screen, and I froze. My eyes scanned the numbers again and again. Billions of dollars. I covered my mouth, but the laugh still escaped, half disbelief, half hysteria. Richard. Of course it would be Richard. He'd always been ahead of everyone, even the world. He bought Bitcoin back when it was a joke, when people called it internet monopoly money. I used to tease him about it. Why not collect seashells instead? At least they're pretty, I'd said once. And he'd winked. Someday, seashells will be jealous. Now here it was, a digital fortune, hidden in an old warehouse, waiting behind a layer of dust and heartbreak. I sat there staring at the number. It didn't even feel real. Not the money, not the miracle, not the message behind it. Because I realized this wasn't about wealth. It was about faith. Richard knew what would happen. He'd seen the ambition in Thomas's eyes long before I did. He must have known the house would fall into hands that worshipped power instead of love. And so he left me something Thomas couldn't touch. Something invisible, incorruptible. Digital justice. Encrypted compassion. I whispered into the quiet room, "You knew I'd end up here, didn't you?" The only answer was the flicker of the laptop screen and the soft hum of rain on the roof. I wiped my eyes, then looked at the reflection in the dark glass. A woman I barely recognized, stared back, hair tangled, eyes swollen, but alive in a way she hadn't been in months. Behind her reflection, the screen glowed. 1 million BTC. It almost looked like a halo. I smiled, a trembling, foolish smile, and said softly, "You didn't just save me, Richard. You gave me back my dignity." Outside, thunder rolled across the fields. Inside, I sat alone with the secret that could rewrite everything. And for the first time since he died, I didn't feel small anymore.
Mr. Grant's office still smells like the same brand of cedar polish Richard used to love. The moment I stepped inside, I felt something tighten in my chest, the scent of unfinished conversations, of trust suspended in time. He looked up from behind his desk, his silver hair catching the light. "Ellie," he said, rising slowly, "you look thinner." I smiled, the kind of smile people use when they don't want to talk about pain. Thomas made sure of that. We sat across from each other, the USB lying between us like a relic. Grant put on his glasses, plugged it into his computer, and the familiar screen appeared. Wallet, 1 billion BTC. He leaned back, speechless for a moment. Good God. "Ellie, do you understand what this means?" I folded my hands, watching his expression shift from awe to disbelief. He whispered, "It's active, still secure, still untouched. Do you know the current value of that wallet?" I shook my head. He turned his monitor toward me. Over $40 billion at today's rate. The number didn't look real. It sat there on the screen like a story someone else was living. I traced the edge of the USB with my finger and said quietly, "It's not mine, Grant. It's the love they threw away." He blinked, taken aback. "You mean Richard's legacy?" I nodded. "No, I mean the kind of love that builds a home, that forgives, that trusts. They burned it down, but somehow he kept a piece of it safe." He leaned forward. "Ellie, you can't just leave this lying around. Thomas," I interrupted. "Thomas can't find it. He wouldn't know what to do with it even if he did. He only knows how to own, not how to protect." He sighed, rubbing his temples. "Then let's protect it properly. We'll create something no one can trace back to you. An anonymous trust, maybe, an offshore structure, something with a moral spine." We spent hours talking. Strategy, legality, ethics. His words blurred into numbers, clauses, signatures. But underneath all that, I could hear the quiet pulse of something pure. Justice. At one point, he looked at me long and hard and said, "You know, Ellie, you're not weak. You're just too kind for a world that mistakes gentleness for surrender." I smiled, a small, tired smile. "And kindness doesn't mean stupidity, Grant." He chuckled softly. "No, but it does make for a dangerous woman when she finally learns to aim it." We decided on a name. Simple, unassuming, impossible to link to me. The Promise Fund. A foundation built not on revenge, but restoration. It would hold the Bitcoin, invest quietly, and feed its returns into causes Richard believed in: animal shelters, hospice care, scholarships for orphans. That night, as I signed the documents, my hands trembled, not from fear, but from the strange weight of purpose. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like a widow or a victim. I felt like the keeper of something sacred. Before I left, Grant stopped me at the door. "Ellie, what are you going to tell Thomas when he comes looking?" I looked back at him, calm. "That love doesn't disappear, Grant. It just changes where it lives." And when I stepped out into the evening air, the city lights blurred through the drizzle, and I realized sometimes betrayal isn't the end. Sometimes it's the beginning of clarity.
It was almost evening when I heard the knock. 3 sharp hits against the warehouse door, impatient, familiar. For a moment, I thought it was the wind, but then came the voice, trembling, desperate. "Mom, are you in there?" "Thomas." I froze mid-step, my hand still on the kettle. Even Max lifted his head, his low growl rumbling softly like thunder under breath. When I opened the door, I barely recognized him. The arrogance that once filled his face had collapsed into something hollow. His suit was wrinkled, his tie loose, his eyes bloodshot. He looked like a man who'd been running, not from danger, but from consequence. "I need help," he said, without even greeting me. "The company, it's gone. They took everything. The house, the cars, the accounts, everything." I said nothing. I just tilted my head, gesturing for him to come inside. The air between us felt heavy, like we were both breathing through glass. I poured him tea, the same way I used to, back when he'd visit only to ask for more money. He cupped the cup with trembling hands. "Mom, do you still have anything Dad left behind? Something. Anything. He must have left something for you, right?" I looked at him for a long time. The question was simple, but the weight of it, the history behind it, pressed down like a confession. Finally, I said quietly, "Yes, a few things he left for me." His shoulders loosened. Hope slipped across his face, fragile but greedy. "I knew it. You'd never let me suffer, Mom. You've always cared for me." I smiled, the kind of smile that hides more than it shows. "Sit down. There's something I want you to see." I walked over to the table and pulled out the old oak box, the one with Richard's carving, the same one that had waited for me in the dark when the world forgot me. Thomas's eyes followed my hands, narrowing with curiosity. "What's that?" Isaac said, "Memories," setting it on the table. I opened the lid slowly. Inside, the laptop glowed to life, its faint hum breaking the silence. I clicked open the same file, wallet.txt, and there, once again, those words lit up the screen.
Wallet balance, 1 million BTC. The light from the screen spilled across his face. Wide eyes, parted lips, the breath catching in his throat. "It's real," he whispered. "Dad left it all to you, didn't he? All of this." I looked at him. Really looked at him. The boy who once called me Mom only when it suited him. The man who took and took until there was nothing left but silence. "Yes," I said softly, "but not for someone who forgot how to be human." He blinked, confused, then angry. "What are you talking about? I'm his son. I have a right." "You have the right to love, Thomas, but you chose the right to take." His jaw clenched. He tried to stand taller, as if intimidation could rewrite morality. But the flicker of guilt in his eyes betrayed him before any word could. I closed the laptop softly, the click echoing louder than his silence. I said, "Your father believed justice doesn't need to shout. It just needs to wait." He stared at me for a long moment, then scoffed. "So you think you've won, keeping everything, living in this broken place?" I looked around the warehouse. The peeling paint, the soft light, the dog sleeping by my feet. "No, Thomas," I replied calmly. "I haven't kept anything. I just haven't lost myself." He left without another word. The door slammed shut, and dust drifted in the air like quiet applause. Max walked over, resting his head on my lap. I stroked his fur and whispered, "We just met a ghost, one born of greed and fear." Outside, the sky turned from gold to gray, and I knew the next time Thomas returned, he wouldn't come for help. He'd come for war. They came for me on a Wednesday. Funny how betrayal always seems to choose the middle of the week. Too late to ruin Monday, too early to save the weekend. Thomas arrived with his lawyer, young, arrogant, and wearing a suit too shiny for its purpose. I was sitting in the small meeting room of Mr. Grant's office, my hands folded on the table, the same way I used to during Sunday Mass, not out of fear, but reverence for what was about to unfold. The door slammed open. "We're filing for guardianship," Thomas declared. "She's lost it. She's transferring assets to a dog fund or something equally insane." His lawyer nodded stiffly, adjusting his tie. "We'll argue mental incompetence under state law." Grant didn't even look up from his papers. He simply said, "Good morning, gentlemen," with a calm that felt like a shield. Thomas sneered. "Morning. You think this is civil? She's stealing my inheritance." Grant leaned back, steepling his fingers. "No, Thomas. She's honoring it." The room went still. For a moment, all I could hear was the ticking of the clock and Max's slow breathing by my chair. "Mr. Grant," the young lawyer said, "if you're implying that a 70-year-old woman transferring billions into a crypto trust is sound judgment, we'll let the judge decide that." Grant smiled faintly, the kind of smile that makes you wonder what he knows that you don't. "We intend to. In fact, why don't we show the court exactly who made that decision?" He opened his laptop and turned the screen toward them. The video began to play. Richard's face filled the room, older, gentler, but alive in a way that silenced everyone. His voice said, "If you're seeing this, it means the house I built has forgotten love. Ellie, my heart, I knew this might happen. This fund, this ledger, it belongs to you and to every living thing you protect in my name." Thomas shot up, eyes wide. What the hell is this? He was manipulated. He didn't... Sit down, Grant said quietly, with the weight of a verdict. This video was notarized and time-stamped. It's legally binding and morally absolute. I looked at Thomas then. Really looked. He wasn't the villain I'd imagined. Not anymore. He was a child, drowning in the consequences of his own greed, gasping for a version of love that had never been earned. He pounded the table. He was biased toward you. I met his eyes and said softly, no, he believed in the one who kept her promise. Silence. Grant clicked one final key. The screen displayed a live transaction log, thousands of lines scrolling fast, unstoppable. As of this moment, he said, every single Bitcoin has been transferred to the Promise Fund, fully automated, irrevocable. Nobody, not even Mrs. Brooks, can withdraw it. Thomas stared, breath shallow, color draining from his face. His lawyer leaned in and whispered something, but he didn't respond. He just sat there, hands trembling, eyes empty. I wanted to hate him. I really did. But watching him fold under the weight of his own choices, I only felt an ache, a quiet mourning for what could have been. He looked at me one last time and muttered, "You destroyed me." I took a deep breath and whispered, "No, Thomas, you did that yourself when you forgot that love isn't property." Grant closed his briefcase with a soft click, the sound final as a church bell after confession. When they left, the room felt lighter, like it had been waiting for this moment to exhale. Max rested his head on my knee, and I stroked his fur, feeling the steady beat beneath my palm. Richard's voice still echoed faintly in my mind. If the house forgets love, then let love find a new home. And that day it did. Not in marble floors or gold ledgers, but in the quiet triumph of keeping a promise no greed could ever steal.
The world found out before I was ready. By morning, my name was everywhere. Headlines screaming louder than truth. Elderly widow holds 1 million Bitcoin. The woman who gave away $40 billion. I sat by the window of the courthouse, watching reporters swarm outside like moths to a flame they couldn't understand. For them, it was a story of madness. For me, it was the story of release. Inside, the air was still. The judge adjusted her glasses, the sound of paper shuffling echoing through the chamber like whispers of history being rewritten. Thomas sat 2 rows ahead, his face pale, his suit too expensive for his new poverty. He didn't look at me, and maybe that was the only kindness left between us. When they called my name, I stood. Every eye turned, every camera pointed, but I felt strangely calm, like the world had already decided what it needed to know. "Mrs. Brooks," the judge said, "do you wish to make a statement before the ruling?" I nodded. My voice didn't tremble. "Yes, Your Honor. I only want to remind the court that wealth is not inheritance. It's stewardship. My husband believed that love is proven not by what we keep, but by what we protect." I turned toward Thomas then. He finally met my eyes, and I saw something break quietly behind his anger. "You will always be your father's son," I said slowly, each word weighted with memory. "But don't claim the inheritance of love you never learned to carry." A silence fell. The kind of silence that doesn't just fill a room, but cleanses it. The judge cleared her throat. "The court recognizes the validity of the Ellie Brooks Trust and the automatic transfer of assets to charitable causes. The will and accompanying video are binding. Case closed." The gavel fell, a sound both merciful and final. Reporters rushed outside to broadcast the moment, but I didn't hear them. I was too busy listening to the sound of something far softer, the quiet unraveling of resentment. Thomas didn't move. He sat there, shoulders slumped, lips trembling. He looked like a boy again, lost in the ruins of his own ambition. I wanted to reach for him, to tell him that forgiveness was still possible. But forgiveness, like love, is something you can't give to someone who won't hold it. So instead, I whispered a prayer only I could hear. May you one day understand what your father meant by legacy. When the session ended, I walked out of the courtroom into the afternoon sun. For the first time in years, I felt light, as if the house, the money, even the pain had all stayed behind those walls. The reporter shouted my name. I smiled gently and said nothing, because some endings don't need explanations, only silence, the kind that lets peace finally speak.
It's strange how silence sounds different when it's finally kind. Months have passed since the trial, and today I came back. The warehouse, the place where I once wept into the dust, now breathes again. Fresh paint glows beneath the morning sun. The cracked walls are gone, replaced with soft amber tones. A new sign hangs above the door. The Richard Brooks Shelter, for the elderly and every forgotten soul with a heartbeat. I stand in the doorway, sunlight brushing against my hands, the same hands that once trembled from rain and loss. Inside, there is laughter now, soft, hesitant laughter. An old woman sips tea beside a catched rat. A man repairs a dog's kennel, humming under his breath. And Max, my faithful boy, runs between them all, his golden fur catching the light like spun honey. I kneel and whisper, "You were right, Richard. The house forgot love, but this place never forgot you." For a moment, it feels like he's here again, his quiet chuckle, the warmth in his voice that always made even sorrow gentle. The breeze drifts through the open door, carrying the scent of jasmine tea and sunlight. It smells like home. On my desk sits the letter he left me, the last line now framed in glass. If love is real, it will always find its way home. I smile, because it did. Love returned, not through wealth or headlines, but through open doors, shared cups of tea, and lives mended by compassion. The money, the noise, the greed, they all faded. But this remains: warmth, laughter, the soft sound of paws against clean floors. Max curls beside my feet, sighing contentedly. I pour a cup of tea and watch the steam rise, curling like a prayer toward heaven. Money has returned to justice, and I have returned to peace. Outside, the wind stirs the curtains. Light spills through the doorway, bright, patient, eternal. And for the first time in years, I feel home.